Hello, everyone. We are back this month with our final The Lab Online. Today, we are going to use gelatin, or better known as jello or jelly, to create a lens. And we are going to create a concave lens so that we can see objects better. It's going to magnify objects for us. So let's start with our first step, which is to collect our supplies. The first thing you'll need is a container or a package of gelatin mix. And you might use Jello, which is a brand name, or you might use one like I have here. But you're going to basically need a recipe for gelatin, and we're going to prepare that recipe and then make our lens. You will also need, depending on your recipe, some water. And I need some hot water, so I have a hot water kettle here. And I also need some cold water, which I have in this cup here. I have a measuring cup, so I have a 1 cup measuring cup because I need 1 cup of hot water and 1 cup of cold water. And I'm going to use that measuring cup to measure my water out and mix it in this bowl. So you'll need a bowl with my package of gelatin. You will also need something to act as a mold. So when I say a mold, we are trying to make the shape of a lens. So it should be rounded. It should look like half of a sphere. So see how this looks like half of a sphere? You need a bowl like this, or I'm going to use a cup like this. You can see that it is rounded and has some sides. But if you don't have a mold that has that shape, that spherical shape, that half spherical shape, you can use something like our measuring cup and then use a sharp knife with the help of an adult to take your mold that comes out and shape it into that lens shape. You will also need a clear plastic barrier, and right here I have a plastic bag that will work as a clear plastic barrier. And I also have a lid that could work as a clear plastic barrier, 2 lids here in different sizes depending on the size of your mold. And basically what that's going to do is your gelatin is going to sit on top of that so that it doesn't get all over your tiny objects that you want to magnify. So I have a button here and a bead because I want to magnify these underneath my gelatin. But you could also use the back of your box with this really tiny font on it to see if it will help magnify those letters so that you can read it easier. Here's my supply list. So make sure that you have all of these things, and then we will get started with our experiment preparation. So the first thing you're going to need to do is make your gelatin, and you should follow the back of your gelatin box. So follow the directions that are on the back of your box. I'm going to follow my directions, which is basically to take a cup of hot water, and pour it into my gelatin mixture, which I already put in the bowl. Sorry, I didn't show you that. And then I had to go get a cup of cold water and put it in there as well. So you put your hot water in first, your cold water and you stir it really, really good. But remember, you are following the directions on the back of your gelatin box. They may be different. If you use instant Jell-O, it will be very different. I'm using a Jell-O that we are going to have to cool for quite a while for it to solidify. So I'm stirring it until all of my dry gelatin is no longer in my water. It is completely dissolved, and then I'm going to pour it into my molds. I'm going to use the bowl I have it already in as a mold, and then I'm also going to use that cup as a mold. Okay, and now what we need to do is we need to get ready to wait. So that was our first step, our first two steps, to make our gelatin and to pour it into our molds. Now it is just time to put it into the refrigerator for at least 4 hours. And this is according to my directions, but I want it to solidify and be nice and solid because it needs to hold its shape. So this is just the time where we wait. We are going to wait for our gelatin to solidify in our mold, and then we can start our testing. Okay, fast forward to our testing. I'm going to grab my gelatin out of the fridge. And you can see it's solid. Awesome. That's great. So I have a little bit of water here, and I'm going to take one of my barriers, one of my clear plastic barriers, and I'm going to wet the surface of it because the gelatin is going to sit on top of it. And if it's wet, it helps it. And I'm also going to wet my fingers and begin to pull away from the sides of the cup. I'm trying my best to keep the shape that the gelatin is in the mold. And this is really, really hard. So you need to be extremely careful and gentle with your gelatin. I'm just trying to gently pull it back from the mold. You might use a little bit of a knife, but even with the knife, it might cut the gelatin. So just be careful. And honestly, I used a very deep bowl and put a lot of gelatin in this bowl. The more shallow the gelatin is, the better. It'll come out easier. You'll be able to pull it away a little easier. I'm going to use a knife. I'm going to even wet the knife. But I'm going to use a knife to kind of cut my gelatin out. And you'll see it's not perfect. So let's flip it over. So now we need to very, very carefully remove it from our mold by turning it upside down. And here it is. Here is my gelatin. Okay. It is not a perfect lens. It's not a perfect half sphere. So I'm going to adjust it a little bit, and that's okay, right? It needs to be a sphere because it needs to be a sphere in order to magnify the objects I want to. So I'm going to take this sharp knife, and if you need to do this, you need to do this with an adult. I'm going to try to cut it into a sphere shape. And like I said, I'm going to get my knife wet because then the gelatin won't stick. This is a very, very messy, the lab online, I will tell you that. And then I'm going to try to just slice a lens out of this gelatin. This is not easy, so like I said, ask for help from an adult. And it's not going to be perfect, so don't stress too much about it being perfect. We're going to do the best we can to make it into a half sphere. You'll also see that as I cut away gelatin to create a half sphere, I'm going to lose a lot of volume from my lens. So I'm taking a lot off. So if you have to cut your gelatin to get the right shape because you don't have a spherical mold, start with more than what you need. It's going to get smaller and smaller, and you want kind of a big lens like this. See? See how much gelatin I took away to get this lens? And it's not perfect at all, but it is a lens shape. It is small at the top and comes out. So let's see if we can magnify some objects. I'm going to start with my button and my bead. And I'm going to place my lens over my object. I'll put my bead in there too. And you're going to want to look at the objects from directly above. So if you look at the top of the lens, not from the sides, but from the top, you should see some magnification happening. So right from the top, straight down. Instead of with the beads, to look at the text, because I think that's easier to see if it's magnified. And while we do this, what we're doing is we're observing. We're observing through our lens, and we are going to record what we see. So I put it over what I want it to magnify, and I'm sorry you can't really see this very well. It's really, really hard, but there is some magnification happening. So I want to talk a little bit about a lens and what it does. So you can see from the top of the lens, you have a small point where the light enters. And what the lens does is it refracts the light. It refracts the light. A lens works by refraction. It bends the light rays as they pass through it, so they change direction. And you can see from this one, they go down and then out. And then what that out does is it makes the objects underneath it look bigger. And that's our last lab online. Now, before we leave, I just want to say, you can try this experiment the best way that you think. You might use a different color Jell-O. I would suggest a lighter one. Or you might make a bigger or a smaller lens. Those are just a few questions you can ask or changes you can make. But thanks for joining us this month on the lab online.